and it is here, at last, that she finally finds happiness. This is just a theory, right? How do we know it's true? We don't. Not for sure. But I choose to believe that it is. I believe.
I know you're going to think I'm crazy or trying to rage bait you by looking at this title, but hear me out. I, like a bunch of you out there, had so many problems with this newest season of Stranger Things, especially the finale, but this one sequence changed everything for me. I actually hated it when it first started out, but then they did this one thing, rather, Mike said this one thing that made me love it and made it one of my favorite parts of the entire Stranger Things franchise. So, hi everybody, my name is Sabrina. For those who don't know me, I'm a clinical psychologist, and on this channel I talk about psychology as we see it in popular Netflix TV series and films. And today, obviously, we'll be talking about Stranger Things, more specifically Stranger Things Season 5 in the finale. And specifically, I want to talk about the scene that I just showed you all. So like I said to start this video, I really hated this scene at first, and that's before we found out that this was Mike really hoping that 11 was still alive. You know, after he finishes sharing the story about Elle and she made her way to this remote village, Will asks, well, is this true? And he says, I don't know, but I choose to believe that it is. And from that moment, I loved it. And that's because they probably don't even realize it is so deeply rooted in psychology, this idea of hope, and the way they portrayed it for teenagers. Well, I guess now they're supposed to be adults, maybe they're 18, makes it even better. And so today I want to talk about the idea of hope, what it is, what it isn't, and why it made this scene just so good. So to start, what is hope, scientifically speaking? So very commonly used definition comes from a psychologist called C.R. Snyder, and he says that hope has two components. The first is agency, the belief that I can move towards the things or the thing that I want. And the second is pathways, the belief that there are ways to get to the thing that I want. And just think about this definition. It's so brilliant. If you have agency, meaning that you can get yourself to a certain goal or somewhere that you want to be, but you don't have pathways, meaning there's not an actual way to get there, that just leads to just frustration and feelings of helplessness. But then if you have pathways, so you know the ways to get there, but there's no agency, there's something that's blocking it, that similarly leads to frustration. And so this definition is just so good, so brilliant. And so what we see from it too is that hope is not passive optimism, but it's really a motivational system. Even after loss, hope doesn't mean believing that things will go back to the way they were. But what it means is life can still have meaning after this loss. And we think of hope based in what Mike said. He said that I choose to believe this, right? Like none of us have control over the future of these situations. He had no control. He wasn't told about this plan that Elle had. For all he knew, they were going to go off to this place that had 3 waterfalls. He wasn't told that she was going to sacrifice herself. And so he had no agency there. But what he does have control over is saying, wait, I can choose the future that I want to happen. Now, hope actually activates the same systems in the brain responsible for things like motivation and reward. So thinking about the dopamine pathway, a lot of us just think about this as the pleasure center, the reward center, which it is, but also it's the motivation center too. So when hope is activating this, that means it can help us to keep going even when things are uncertain. The next thing that hope activates is our prefrontal cortex. So this part I mentioned a bunch on my channel, responsible in future-oriented thinking, planning, organization, cognitive flexibility, all these different things. So when we experience trauma or grief, it can really throw off this system for us. But what hope does in activating it, it reopens mentally that future to us and our ability to actually plan for the future rather than being stuck in the present in our trauma, in our grief. Another thing it does is it actually buffers our stress system. So it lowers cortisol, it helps our immune system, helps with emotion regulation. I mean, in short, hope literally changes our brain. It changes how we process pain, and it changes as well how we look at probability, so how we look at the future. I talk about this next point so much in the very last video that I did on Henry Creel, and that's how loss and trauma in general can change and shatter our worldview and kind of collapse it upon itself. So it changes certain views like the world is safe, the people that I love will be here, and my future will have X or will involve X. And that's why, as well, in another video, I talk about the importance of when it actually comes to mourning, not just mourning people, but mourning even major changes. Because in the case of Mike, and even some of the other gang, but in the case of Mike specifically, him and Elle talked about settling down together after the Upside Down was completely destroyed. They'd run away together, run away to this place. So that is what his future was. And then in that same moment where she decided to go down with the Upside Down, that all got taken away with him. Now his entire future and the image that he had of it is completely gone. But up until this point, they've kind of escaped, at least Mike and some of the gang, kind of escaped some of the more harsher deaths. I mean, Dustin was really super close with Eddie, so he felt that one the most. And in terms of Billy, I mean, none of the gang liked Billy. Barb was Nancy's friend, right? So a lot of it that they were spared from this, so they still kind of had the idea of, okay, my friends, my core group, they're going to be there with me. Probably, or maybe even especially after they first rescued Will from the Upside Down. Like, if they can do that, then they can believe, okay, we're going to be safe, we're going to be all right. But this situation with 11 directly flew in the face with that. I mean, one of the main crew and Mike, I mean, his girlfriend, completely gone. So in this, hope becomes really powerful because we can build a new narrative of the future. And Mike so beautifully recounts the narratives for all the crew and including himself. Like, he's going to go on to become a storyteller, to become an author. So now, because of that hope, he can have a future, which before we see without that hope, he really didn't see one for himself. I mean, looking at the graduation, for instance, he almost didn't go. Hopper had to go and talk with him. It's only after he chatted with him that Mike was finally able to kind of reopen his mind to thinking about the future. And we don't know exactly when Mike came up with this kind of theory about 11. It definitely wasn't in that moment as he was sharing it with the group, and so it could have been soon after the conversation with Hopper, which gave him that hope to move forward. So hope can rebuild that future narrative. It can restore our own sense of agency, that we do have some power and some control, and it allows meaning to coexist with the pain. So often we'll hear people say, maybe I don't feel better, but I do feel different. And that's what makes hope very different than toxic positivity, for example. So hope allows pain. It allows that experience. It doesn't pretend that it isn't there. It accepts reality. It allows the sadness, and it coexists with grief. Unhealthy hope, or this more toxic positivity, does not do these things. It denies pain. It pressures your healing. So it says, okay, I need to get over this. Like, I need to stop being such a Debbie Downer. I need to move through. So it rushes that process. And it forces certain things like saying everything happens for a reason. Now, this is a phrase, a sentiment that I've never really liked. I have a strong disdain for it. And I think it's for this reason, that it's often used as a way to invalidate people's pain in the moment and almost like to say, okay, either you need to get over it, or if we do it to ourselves, to say, I need to get over it because it happened for a reason. I just don't know what it is yet. Like, it doesn't allow ourselves the space to process what we're going through. Now, I do think there can be a lot of truth in that sentiment, but just the way that we use it is in this kind of toxic positivity way, saying it's not okay to be sad. It happened for a reason, so move on. And that's not what Mike is doing either. And later in this video, I'll talk a little bit about this, and I'll talk about developmentally with them being as teenagers, how this kind of hope is appropriate and why it might not be, or how it might look different for us as fully grown adults. But you all might have heard it said that grief is love with nowhere to go, right? In the case of all of the gang, how they lost 11, they had that love for her, but now with her gone, there's like almost no one to point that at. And when you focus on the loss, you're focusing on that fact, that aspect. However, with hope, what that can do is that it can better redirect that love now into memories that you might have with that person, or redirect it into a legacy. They talk about when they were doing D&D, they talked about Elle and being the mage and the legacy that she had left. You can redirect it into purpose, into even new bonds that you might make. So hope isn't forgetting. It's a way to transform that love and make it more useful almost. And up until this point, this might sound very nice and very sweet, and you might think just very excessive, right? However, there are some real tangible benefits to hope. I mean, I already mentioned some and how it changes our brain, but there's real tangible benefits in terms of our mental health too. Hope has been found to significantly lower depression, lower suicide risk, increase resilience, and help us better cope emotionally after stress. Because you're now shifting the attention from what has gone wrong to what is possible. And think about it, just like the kids in this situation, if they continue to focus on the things that went wrong and how Elle did die, because she did die, so many of you are making all these wild theories about how she's alive, but the fact that she did die, that is incredibly depressing. And especially for Mike, I mean, I know he's young, but at this point in time, that relationship means so much. So, especially for Mike, that has now staked his whole future on her, that can be just crumbling, right? But if you now focus instead on, okay, here's what's possible. So, here is now this future, maybe where Elle's alive, and that allows us to more move forward, that definitely helps to lift, that depression. And like I mentioned a couple times, with it restoring that agency or that internal control, imagine how that helps depression too. If we are stuck in the fact that this thing happened, I didn't have control over it, or worse, blaming ourselves for maybe things that we wish we did in the moment, didn't do, etc., then of course we're only going to be on this downward spiral when it comes to depression and sadness. However, if we are able to now turn that into hope, and especially the story that they had where, no, Elle's actually still alive. It's because she is such a crafty mage that she was able to do this so skillfully and other people didn't even notice. Now that returns some more control and them being able to say, you know what, I'm choosing to believe this because I don't have evidence really to prove otherwise. Because Mike and the gang are put into a state of what's known as ambiguous loss. And that's where, like in this case, 11 isn't confirmed dead. So there's no closure. This happens a lot for people, say, for folks who maybe their child goes missing or was kidnapped and it's been years and years, but there hasn't been any news. They haven't found the body or haven't found the child, and so they're presumed dead, but you just don't know. You're in this state of ambiguous loss and mourning because they're no longer in your life, but you actually don't know what happened. There's no certainty. You don't get a ritual closure, which based on culture can vary a lot of ways, but typically in America that would just be like a funeral service. So you don't get that kind of ritual closure, and you have this experience where the person is physically absent, but they're still psychologically present. I mean, it's torture. So this loss is much harder than a loss in terms of there being a confirmed death because the brain isn't able to complete the grief cycle, and you can have this hope and despair coexisting together. Now, earlier I mentioned how in terms of healthy hope, we want to have hope and we can have grief coexist, but not despair. Like again, taking for example that parent where their kid goes missing, there's going to be moments, and maybe if there's in the investigation, if they find evidence that might say that they're alive or etc., there's going to be that hope. Or maybe you're just feeling good one day, so you're feeling more hopeful, and then you'll alternate between these moments of deep despair when you really think about the fact this person isn't in your life anymore, how they could be being harmed. You're on this teeter-totter. You're stuck in limbo. And so what Mike is doing, making up this story, and remember for him, it is a story because they never saw Kali, they never saw her die. And so they don't realize that she wasn't there to actually make it possible that this whole plan that he constructed could work. And so for them, it's not just fantasy. This is a regulation technique. Like doing this stabilizes the nervous system and the brain that is out of whack. And this is really what makes hope such a paradox because it isn't strongest when life is easy. It's strongest when we are broken and we choose to stay open after being broken. I mean, it is earned. It is incredibly, incredibly brave, especially in those moments when you've had deep loss and the future can seem so unknown. It's brave to believe otherwise. And it really is deep it's incredibly, incredibly profound. Without hope, we could easily feel numb or succumb to feelings of numbness, be helpless or completely dysregulated. So like I mentioned before, this is a way to actually regulate our nervous system that can be so out of control. Because in the ways that we're seeing Mike doing it, like the different systems I talk about with dopamine, it activates that not just motivation, but anticipation piece. So anticipating this reunion. If Elle's alive and she's in some remote city, then I can get to her one day. And that's the pathways thing, right? Not just the agency of I have a way to get there, but the pathways idea of, okay, well, if she's still alive, then there is a way for me to get to her. Mike didn't know it in this moment, but he is using a very real psychology technique in terms of narrative psychology. And in narrative psychology, it talks about the idea that us as humans, we really survive through stories that we have. And so Mike, he's refusing a tragic ending to a story of she's gone forever, 11's gone forever. And instead he chooses, okay, this is the part that we actually don't know yet. We don't know whether she's gone forever or not, and I choose to believe she's not. So what he's doing is what's known as a narrative reconstruction. With trauma, as I mentioned earlier, it shatters these stories that we have. But hope creates a new chapter, and not a false one, but an unfinished one. I mean, us looking at the story, we know we have the benefit of knowing that 11 really is dead, that Collie died, all these things that Mike is talking about can't actually happen, but he doesn't. And so, in that sense, it's not crazy or delusional for him to come up with this plan of her really being alive when he didn't actually have solid evidence to prove otherwise, other than obviously seeing her there. But his theory made a lot of sense, especially if Collie was still alive in that moment. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to talk about the adolescent brain and how specifically this kind of hope that we see in Mike is very adaptive and just how it differs for teenagers versus adults. Before we do that, the last thing that I want to say is I know watching this, there might be some people that are saying, these folks that have all this hope, they're just refusing to accept reality. That's what Mike's doing. He's, just wanting to have this nice, lovely ending and can't accept difficult things. Well, what I would say to that is that the other paradox of hope is that hope can hurt too. Choosing hope means that you risk disappointment, you keep yourself emotionally open, and you don't numb out from it. That's why I was saying before that it's incredibly brave. Mike and the others could accept the loss. They could shut down, but instead they choose to remain open. And we see that Mike almost did. He almost didn't even walk the stage. And a lot of times that can be a lot easier than having hope because that hope can be dashed. Okay, so looking at the teenage brain, and I talk a bunch about this in the video that I did on grief, my larger recap of Stranger Things. And I know that video length can kind of scare you, but I do put chapters in it where you can just skip to the portions where I talk about grief as you see it in the different seasons. So I think it was season 3 that I talk about the idea of the teenage brain and how specifically grief impacts it, and it does too for hope. So in that video, I talk about the prefrontal cortex and how, as most of us know, that doesn't fully develop until we're in our mid-20s. And like I just said, this is the thinking, the planning area of the brain, as well as this is the decision-making area and reality testing for us to be able to say, does this really line up with the reality and the evidence that we have in reality or not? So for teenagers, this is still developing. So what that means is they are way more emotional and they use emotion over logic. But not only that, they have a hyperactive kind of limbic system, hyperactive amygdala, all of that. So their emotions are naturally stronger than adults. So what this means in terms for hope is that, as we know, that is an emotion, it's a feeling that teenagers feel that bigger than we do, than adults. They feel that bigger and the beliefs are just held more passionately and the emotional narratives can carry more weight than logic can. And so the emotional aspect of the story of believing that 11 was saved, that can hold more weight than other evidence in terms of literally seeing with their eyes her go away. So Mike isn't being naive. What he's doing is developmentally appropriate, that his brain prioritizes this more emotional truth over a more factual closure that she did in fact die. For teens, this is a way to just emotionally survive. And another thing that's big that I talked about in the last video too for teenagers is identity formation. This is a huge period of identity formation where teens are asking the questions of who am I? Who will I be? What do relationships mean to me? When we look at Mike, a big part of his identity, I mean, they call him the heart. He is very, very loyal. There's aspects of courage to him as well. Friendships we see is a huge theme throughout the show. And so him picking to be more hopeful is actually more in line with his personality and his identity that we see. So him being the one to fall more into despair isn't in line with that. So him choosing hope is him like choosing this is who I am. And so for teenagers, hope is really identity shaping versus for us, more adults, hope can be more identity preserving. Now, going into teen relationships and their attachments, for teenagers, this can really feel like when it comes to attachments, life or death. And these are often the first real deep, true bonds that we feel as people is often when we're in this kind of teenage phase. And looking at Mike and his group of friends, they get that very early on, and 11 joins their crew early on. So they all have very deep bonds, which is only deepened by their trauma bonding that they have going through all their experiences in the upside down. So separation can feel catastrophic at this point for teenagers. And so Mike creating this story and giving that as a gift to the others is so beneficial because it keeps them from this kind of full collapse when it comes to attachment and allows them to keep 11 psychologically alive, but to do that in a positive way too. Not just that, oh, she's alive in my heart, but I really know she's dead, but more of, okay, well, I don't actually know, so I can just keep her alive and think about the future and the things that she might be doing and the things that she might be enjoying. And so it allows her to do this in a positive way, or allows them to do this in a positive way. Now, remember when I said the prefrontal cortex helps a lot with reality testing? Because that's not fully developed in teenagers, they are way worse at this reality integration than we are. So what this means is they are way more likely to go all in on one story. So either she's alive in the case of 11, or everything is ruined. And this kind of black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking is incredibly common during adolescence. Us as adults, we are much better because this part of our brain is fully developed. We're much better at holding both hope and realism. So we can think, okay, they might be gone, but I can still live and I can still enjoy life. And so with teens, what this also means is that their hope is more absolute. If they can only think in black and white, and so if they think that she is alive, their hope is much stronger than ours. And if you think about it, what that also means is that their hope is much more emotionally protective because they fully believe, okay, this is the truth. And that's what we see with the gang. They fully believe this is what happens. And so it protects them way more emotionally than us as adults that have the nuance. And so you might think, well, then is teen hope less realistic? I mean, not exactly. Like I kind of mentioned before, teens use this emotional logic, whereas we use probability logic, us adults, meaning what is more likely to be the case. So the examples with a child that's been kidnapped, for example, after a period of days and no news, the probability of them being alive is unlikely. It's much more probable that they're deceased. And so for the adult, that is what we're much more likely to think versus maybe for a teen. And neither of these ways of thinking is incorrect. The emotional logic, really what it says is, what do I need to believe in order to survive this? And that's what Mike is doing, so that his world and his friends, their world doesn't just completely crumble under the weight of grief. He comes up with a story that helps them to believe something to survive that pain. Now, if Mike were 40, this may look like denial, right? But since he's not 40, only maybe, I guess, 18 at this point, 17, 18, like I said earlier, this is developmentally appropriate, developmentally healthy hope. And this kind of hope is powerful. Not only does it help to sustain a person through the chaos, but it can really override a lot of fear and it can push a person to act. So this is why teens can really start movements and fight systems and just take more emotional risks than we can. And so Mike's hope, it keeps the group grounded, but it also fuels action. Like, don't get stuck in this mourning that we're experiencing, but allows them to move on forward in their life, whether that be college and onward. And so to end, I just want to say that if this resonated with you or you're experiencing loss yourself, you're not broken for still hoping. You're human. Hope doesn't make you weak. Hope doesn't mean that you're in denial. Hope doesn't mean that you're crazy. It means that you're doing what you need to do to emotionally survive. And as you now know, this isn't just based in fairy tale or wishful thinking, it's based in science.
Do you think that could be real for us? Yeah, of course. If Vecna's gone, then what's stopping us? It'd be like a lie. Like I'm okay with moving on, and I'm not.